my goal is to, well, first of all, look. Second of all, my goal today is to be able to get the book in less than 3 tries. I think I could do it. Try number 1. Here we go. It feels like a book. It might look like a book, but it is that same one sock. Please, if you have seen the magic sock, please send it to me. I'm losing my marbles. Try number 2. I think it's gonna work. I think it's, oh, it feels like something. It feels like a book. It feels like a, again, it's my backup book. Okay, try number 3. Have I finally mastered? I found it. And look, no mess at all. Mary Poppins. Now we read 2 chapters yesterday. And I think today we're going to read, it's called Chapter 9, and it's called John and Barbara's Story. Now I think it's a rather long chapter. It is quite long. And then we're finally on Chapter 10. So, coming close, we're going to read the 9th chapter of our story. Alright, this is kind of sad. I'm going to be pretty honest with all of you, but today the wind is changing. And as we know, if you've ever heard of Mary Poppins or heard my story, when the wind changes I have to go, but it doesn't mean that we aren't going to see each other again. Today we're going to read Chapter 9, John and Barbara's Story. And once I'm done this chapter, we will have someone else reading the last chapters of the book. I hope you enjoyed our story time, and until the wind changes again, I can't wait to see you. Chapter 9, John and Barbara's Story. Jane and Michael had gone off to a party, wearing their best clothes and looking, as Ellen the housemaid said when she saw them, just like a shop window. All the afternoon the house was very quiet and still, as though it were thinking its own thoughts or dreaming, perhaps. Down in the kitchen, Miss Brill was reading the paper with her spectacles perched on her nose. Robertson A. was sitting in the garden, busily doing nothing, and Mrs. Banks was in the drawing-room sofa, with her feet up, and the house stood quietly still around them all, dreaming its own dreams, or thinking, perhaps. Upstairs in the nursery, Mary Poppins was airing the clothes by the fire, and the sunlight poured in at the window, flickering on the white walls, dancing over the cots where the babies were sleeping. "I say, move over, you're right in my eyes," said John in a loud voice. "Sorry," said the sunlight, "but I can't help it. I've got to get across the room somehow. Orders is orders. I must move from the east to the west in a day, and my way lies through this nursery. Sorry, shut your eyes and you won't even notice me." The gold shaft of sunlight lengthened across the room. It was obviously moving as quickly as it could in order to oblige John. "How soft, how sweet you are! I love you," said Barbara, holding out her hand to its shining warmth. "Good girl," said the sunlight approvingly, and moved up over her cheek and into her hair with a light caressing movement. "Do you like the feel of me?" it said, as though it loved being praised. "Delicious," said Barbara with a happy sigh. "Chatter, chatter, chatter. I've never heard such a place for chatter. There's always somebody talking in this room," said a shrill voice by the window. Barbara and John looked up. It was the starling who lived on top of the chimney. "I like that," said Mary Poppins, turning around quickly. "What about yourself? All day long, yes, and half the night too, on the roofs and the telegraph poles, roaring and screaming and shouting. You'd talk the leg off of a chair, you would. Worse than any spar, that's the truth." The starling cocked its head to one side and looked at her from his perch in the window frame. "Well said," he said. "I have my business to attend to. Consultations, discussions, arguments, bargaining, and that, of course, necessitates a certain amount of quiet conversation." "Quiet!" exclaimed John, laughing. "And I wasn't talking to you either, young man," said the starling, hopping down from the window-sill. "And you needn't talk anyway. I heard you for several hours on end last Saturday. Goodness, I thought you'd never stop. You kept me awake all night." That wasn't talking, said John. I had a pain. Said the starling, and hopped off to the railing of Barbara's cot. He sidled along it until he came to the head, where he said in a soft, wheedling voice, "Well, Barbara B., anything for the old fella today, eh?" Barbara pulled herself into a sitting position by holding on to one of the bars of her cot. "There's the other half of my arrowroot biscuit," she said, and she held it out in her round, fat fist. The starling swooped down, plucked it out of her hand, and flew back to the window-sill. He began nibbling it greedily. "Thank you," said Mary Poppins meaningly, but the starling was too busy eating to notice the rebuke. "I said thank you," said Mary Poppins a little louder. The starling looked up. What?" "Oh, get along, girl, get along. I've no time for such frills and furbelows," and he gobbled up the last of his biscuit. The room was very quiet. John, drowsing in the sunlight, put his toes of his right foot into his mouth and ran them along the place where his teeth were just beginning to come through. "Why do you bother doing that?" said Barbara in a soft, amused voice that seemed to be full of laughter. "There's nobody to see you." "I know," said John, playing a tune on his toes, "but I like to keep it practice. It does so amuse the grown-ups. Did you notice that Aunt Flossie nearly went mad with delight when I did it yesterday? The darling, the clever, the marvel, the creature. Didn't you hear her say all of that?" And John threw his foot from him and roared with laughter at the thought of Aunt Flossie. "She liked my trick, too," said Barbara. "I took off both of my socks, and she said I was so sweet that she would like to eat me. Isn't that funny? When I say I'd like to eat something, I really mean it. Biscuits and rusks and the knobs of beds and so on. But grown-ups never mean what they say, it seems to me. She really could have wanted to eat me, couldn't she?" "No, it's only a silly way of them talking," said John. "I don't believe I'll ever understand a grown-up. They all seem so silly, and even Jane and Michael are silly sometimes." Agreed Barbara, although pulling off her socks and putting them on again. "For instance," John went on, "they don't understand a single thing we say. But worse than that, they don't understand what other things say. Why, only last Monday I heard Jane remark that she wished she knew the language the wind spoke." "I know," said Barbara. "It's astonishing. And Michael always insists. Haven't you heard him? That the starling says, 'Wee, twee, twee'? He seems to not know that starling says nothing of the kind, but speaks exactly the same language we do. Of course one doesn't expect mother and father to know that. They don't know anything, though they are such darlings, but you think Jane and Michael would." "They did once," said Mary Poppins, folding Jane's nightgown. "What?" said John and Barbara together in a very surprised voice. "Really? You mean they understood the starling and the wind and what the trees say in the language of the sunset and the stars, and of course they did once," said Mary Poppins. But how is it they've forgotten it all?" said John, wrinkling up his forehead and trying to understand. "Aha!" said the starling knowingly, looking up from the remains of the biscuit. "Wouldn't you like to know?" "Because they've grown older," said Mary Poppins. "Barbara, put on your socks at once, please." "That's a silly reason," said John, looking sternly at her. "It's the only true one, then," said Mary Poppins. She was tying Barbara's socks on firmly around her ankles. "Well, it's Jane and Michael who are silly," John continued. "I know I shan't forget when I'm older." "Nor I," said Barbara, contently sucking her finger. "Yes, you will," said Mary Poppins. The twins sat up and looked at her. "Huh?" said the starling. "Look at 'em. They think they're the world's wonders, little miracles. I don't think. Of course you'll forget, same as Jane and Michael." "We won't," said the twins, looking at the starling as if they'd like to murder him. The starling jeered. "I say you will," he insisted. "It isn't your fault, of course," he added more kindly. "You'll forget because you just can't help it. There will never be a human being that remembered after the age of 1, at the very latest, except, of course, her," and he jerked his head towards Mary Poppins. "But why can she remember and not us?" said John. "Aha! She's different. She's the great exception. Can't go by her," said the starling, grinning at them both. John and Barbara went silent. The starling went on explaining. "She's something special, you see, not in the matter of looks, of course. One of my own day-old chicks is handsomer than Mary Poppins ever was." "Here, you're impertinent," said Mary Poppins crossly, making a dart at him and flicking her apron in his direction. But the starling leapt aside and flew to the window frame, whistling wickedly, well out of reach. "Thought you had me that time, didn't you?" he jeered, and he shook his wing feathers at her. Mary Poppins snorted. The sunlight moved on through the room, drawing its long gold shaft after it. Outside, a light wind had sprung up, and was whispering gently to the cherry trees in the lane. "Listen, listen, the wind's talking," said John, tilting his head to his side. "Do you really mean we won't be able to hear that when we're older, Mary Poppins?" "You'll hear all right," said Mary, "but you won't understand." And at that Barbara began to weep gently. There were tears in John's eyes, too. "Well, it can't be helped. It's how things happen," said Mary Poppins. "Look at them, just look at them," said the starling. "Crying fit to kill themselves. Why, as starlings in the eggs got more sense. Look at them." For John and Barbara were now crying in their cots, long-drawn sobs of deep unhappiness. Suddenly the door opened, and in came Mrs. Banks. "I thought I heard the baby," she said. Then she ran to the twins. "What is it, my darlings? Oh, my treasures, my sweets, my lovebirds, what is it? Why are you crying so, Mary Poppins?" "Why are they crying so, Mary Poppins?" "They've been so quiet all afternoon. Not a sound out of them. What could ever be the matter?" "Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. I'm expecting they're getting their teeth, ma'am," said Mary Poppins, deliberately not looking in the direction of the bird. "Of course that must be it," said Mrs. Banks. "I don't want teeth, if they make me forget all the things I like best," said John, wailing about in his cot. "Neither do I," said Barbara, burying her face in a pillow. "My poor ones, my pets, it'll be right when the naughty old teeth come through," said Mrs. Banks soothingly, going from one cot to the other. "You don't understand," said John. "I don't want teeth." "It'll be all right, it'll be all wrong," said Barbara to her pillow. Yes, there, mother knows best, mother understands. It'll be all right when the teeth come through," said Mrs. Banks. A faint noise came through the window. It was the starling, hurriedly swallowing a laugh. Mary Poppins gave him a look that sobered him, and he continued to regard the scene with the hint of a smile. Mrs. Banks was patting the children gently, first one then the other, and murmuring words that were meant to be reassuring. Suddenly John stopped crying. He had very good manners, and was fond of his mother, and remembered what was due to her. It wasn't her fault, poor woman, that she had always said the wrong thing. It was just, he reflected, that she didn't understand. So to show that he forgave her, he turned on his back, and very dolefully, sniffing back his tears, picked up his right foot in his hand, ran his toes along his mouth. "Clever one, oh, clever one," said his mother. He did it again, and she was very pleased. Then Barbara, not to be outdone in courtesy, came out of her pillow, and with tears still wet on her face, sat up and plucked off both of her socks. "Wonderful girl," said her mother proudly, and kissed her. "There, you see, Mary Poppins, they're quite good again. I can always comfort them. Quite good," said Mrs. Banks, as though she were singing a lullaby. "And the teeth will soon be through." "Yes, ma'am," said Mary Poppins quietly, and smiling to the twins. Mrs. Banks went out the closed door. The moment she disappeared, the starling burst into a peal of rude laughter. "Excuse me smiling," he cried, "but really I can't help it. What a scene! What a scene!" John took no notice of him. He pushed his face through the bars of his cot and called softly and fiercely to Barbara. "I won't be like the others. I tell you I won't. They," he jerked his head to the starling and Mary Poppins, "can say what they like. I'm never going to forget." Mary Poppins smiled a secret. "I know better than you sort of smile," all to herself. "Nor I," said Barbara, "ever." "Bless my tail feathers, listen to them," said the starling, as he put his wings on his hips and roared through the mirth. "As if they could help forgetting. Why, in a month or two, 3 at most, they won't even know my name. Silly cuckoos, silly half-grown featherless cuckoos. Ha, ha, ha!" And with another loud peal of laughter, he spread his speckled wings and flew out of the window. It wasn't very long afterwards that the teeth, after much trouble, came through, as all teeth must, and the twins had their very first birthday. The day after their birthday party, the starling, who had been away on holiday, came back to number 17 Cherry Tree Lane. "Hello, hello, hello! Here we are again," he screamed, joyfully landing with a little wobble upon the window-sill. "Well, how's the girl?" he inquired cheekily of Mary Poppins. He tilted his head to one side and regarded her with a bright, amused, twinkling eye. "None the better for your asking," said Mary Poppins, tossing her head. The starling laughed. "Same old Mary P," he said. "No change out of you. How are the other ones, the cuckoos? How are they?" he asked. He looked at Barbara's cot. "Well, Barbina," he began in his soft, wheedling voice, "anything for the old fellow today?" "Blah, blah, 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 blah," said Barbara, crooning gently as she continued to eat her arrowroot biscuit. The starling, with a start of surprise, hopped a little nearer. "I said," he repeated more distinctly, "is there anything for the old fellow today, Barbie, dear?" "Baloo, Baloo, Baloo," muttered Barbara, staring at the ceiling as she swallowed her sweet crumb. The starling stared at her. "Ha!" he said suddenly, and he turned and looked inquiringly at Mary Poppins. Her quiet glance met him in a long look. Then, with a darting movement, the starling flew over to John's cot and alighted on the rail. John had a large woolly lamb hugged close in his arms. "What's my name? What's my name? What's my name?" said the starling in a shrill, anxious voice. Said John, opening his mouth and putting one leg of the woolly lamb into it. With a little shake of his head, the starling turned away. "So it happened," he said to Mary Poppins. She nodded. The starling gazed dejectedly for a moment at the twins, then he shrugged his speckled shoulders. "Oh, well, I knew it would. Always told him so, but they wouldn't believe me." He remained silent for a little longer, staring into the cots. Then he shook himself vigorously. "Well, well, I must be off. Back to the chimney. It'll need a spring cleaning, I'll be bound." He flew on down the window-sill and paused, looking back over his shoulder. "It'll seem funny without them, though. Always liked talking to them. So I did. I'll miss them." He brushed his wings quickly across his eyes. "Crying?" said Mary Poppins. The starling drew himself up. "Crying? Certainly not. I have a slight cold on my return journey, that's all. Yes, a slight cold, nothing serious." He darted up out of the window pane, brushed down his breast feathers with his beak, and then, "Well, cheerio, Barbara, John, Mary. Cheerio," he said perkily, and he spread his wings and was gone. I've enjoyed reading with you children and families. I hope you've really enjoyed this story so far. It's not done yet, and I promise there will be even more fun adventures to be had, but the wind has changed, and so I must be on my way. I hope you all have a great day, and I can't wait to see you next time. Not next time that we're reading, but maybe next time for the next book. There is more than one Mary Poppins book. The next one is called Mary Poppins Comes Back, and I can promise that I do. Have a great day. It's been a pleasure, and stay amazing, stay kind, and remember, reading is a joy.